for reading and writing almost entirely, while a later one had been to shut me out from exercise of any kind under penalty of immediate and great exhaustion. I had been under the care of doctors of the highest standing both in Europe and America, men in whose power to help me I had had great faith, with no or ill result. Then, at a time when I seemed to be rather rapidly losing ground, I heard some things that gave me interest enough in mental healing to make me try it. I had no great hope of getting any good from it. It was a chance I tried, partly because my thought was interested in the new possibility it seemed to open, partly because it was the only chance I then could see. I went to X in Boston, from whom some friends of mine had got, or thought that they had got, great help. The treatment was a silent one. Little was said, and that little carried no conviction to my mind. Whatever influence was exerted was that of another person's thought or feeling silently projected on to my unconscious mind, into my nervous system, as it were, as we sat still together. I believed from the start in the possibility of such action, for I knew the power of the mind to shape, helping or hindering, the body's nerve activities, and I thought telepathy probable, although unproved, but I had no belief in it as more than a possibility, and no strong conviction nor any mystic or religious faith connected with my thought of it that might have brought imagination strongly into play. I sat quietly with the healer for half an hour each day, at first with no result. Then, after 10 days or so, I became quite suddenly and swiftly conscious of a tide of new energy rising within me, a sense of power to pass beyond old halting places, of power to break the bounds that, though often tried before, had long been veritable walls about my life, too high to climb. I began to read and walk as I had not done for years, and the change was sudden, marked, and unmistakable. This tide seemed to mount for some weeks, 3 or 4 perhaps, when, summer having come, I came away, taking the treatment up again a few months later. The lift I got proved permanent, and left me slowly gaining ground instead of losing it. But with this lift the influence seemed in a way to have spent itself, and though my confidence in the reality of the power had gained immensely from this first experience, and should have helped me to make further gain in health and strength if my belief in it had been the potent factor there, I never after this got any result at all as striking or as clearly marked as this which came when I made trial of it first, with little faith and doubtful expectation. It is difficult to put all the evidence in such a matter into words, to gather up into a distinct statement all that one bases one's conclusions on. But I have always felt that I had abundant evidence to justify, to myself at least, the conclusion that I came to then, and since have held to, that the physical change which came at that time was, first, the result of a change wrought within me by a change of mental state, and secondly, that that change of mental state was not, save in a very secondary way, brought about through the influence of an excited imagination or a consciously received suggestion of an hypnotic sort. Lastly, I believe that this change was the result of my receiving telepathically, and upon a mental stratum quite below the level of immediate consciousness, a healthier and more energetic attitude, receiving it from another person whose thought was directed upon me with the intention of impressing the idea of this attitude upon me. In my case, the disease was distinctly what would be classed as nervous, not organic, but from such opportunities as I have had of observing, I have come to the conclusion that the dividing line that has been drawn is an arbitrary one. the nerves controlling the internal activities and the nutrition of the body throughout. And I believe that the central nervous system, by starting and inhibiting local centers, can exercise a vast influence upon disease of any kind if it can be brought to bear. In my judgment, the question is simply how to bring it to bear, and I think that the uncertainty and remarkable differences in the results obtained through mental healing do but show how ignorant we are as yet of the forces at work, and of the means we should take to make them effective. That these results are not due to chance coincidences, my observation of myself and others makes me sure. That the conscious mind, the imagination, enters into them as a factor in many cases is doubtless true, but in many others, and sometimes very extraordinary ones, it hardly seems to enter in at all. On the whole, I am inclined to think that as the healing action, like the morbid one, springs from the plane of the normally unconscious mind, so the strongest and most effective impressions are those which it receives, in some as yet unknown subtle way, directly from a healthier mind whose state, through a hidden law of sympathy, it reproduces. Close quote. Case 2. Quote, at the urgent request of friends, and with no faith and hardly any hope, possibly owing to a previous unsuccessful experience with a Christian Scientist, our little daughter was placed under the care of a healer, and cured of a trouble about which the physician had been very discouraged by his diagnosis. This interested me, and I began studying earnestly the method and philosophy of this method of healing. Gradually, an inner peace and tranquillity came to me in so positive a way that my manner changed greatly. My children and friends noticed the change and commented upon it. All feelings of irritability disappeared. Even the expression on my face changed noticeably. I had been bigoted, aggressive, and intolerant in discussion, both in public and private. I grew broadly tolerant and receptive toward the views of others. I had been nervous and irritable, coming home 2 or 3 times a week with a sick headache induced, as I then supposed, by dyspepsia and catarrh. I grew serene and gentle, and the physical troubles entirely disappeared. I had been in the habit of approaching every business interview with an almost morbid dread. I now meet everyone with confidence and inner calm. I may say that the growth has all been toward the elimination of selfishness. I do not mean simply the grosser, more sensual forms, but those subtler and generally unrecognized kinds, such as express themselves in sorrow, grief, regret, envy, etc. It has been in the direction of a practical, working realization of the immanence of God and the divinity of man's true inner self. Close quote. End of Lecture 5.